Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. Jessa here, brand new episode. So excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you for tuning in, spending a little time with me. So the Intimacy with Ease method, right, that I have developed after all these years, a culmination of all this work with all these couples, kind of comes down to 4 pillars, right, that come together that people have to take on to create easy intimacy in their relationship. And today's topic kind of bridges some of them. It's interesting. I'm talking to Yael Rosenstock Gonzalez about communication, about desires and boundaries. And while mostly that fits into the alignment pillar about with your partner, about communication and teamwork and allies, it also sort of straddles into the practicing part that you're going to have to do this in real time and you may have to develop that skill. And a little bit of it is even about mindset, understanding yourself and your own desires and things like that. But anyway, even though it doesn't clearly fit in one pillar, it's certainly relevant to creating the best sex life you can have with your partner, right? Easy intimacy with no barriers, no guardedness, no pressure, no risk, no failure. And the ability to know yourself, to know your own desires and preferences and your own boundaries and triggers, and to inform your partner about this stuff and work together. That's what helps you have the best sex you can have. So she's here to join me to talk about having these conversations, some tips about it, how these things go, what are some red flags in trying to work with a partner around these things, how does this actually work in real life. So hope you get a lot out of it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So Yael, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. This is interesting because we're going to be talking about communicating desires and boundaries. So I'm curious, I mean, obviously they're both important, but why put these together? Like, why is that one conversation?
It's funny. This is not why per se, but I did a guest lecture last year for a human sexuality course, and the instructor warned me that folks don't respond too well to conversations around consent and sexual assault, that they kind of zone out and they're not present. And by the end of that class, like, she sent me a review, and she said that she had students who never participated who participated in that lecture that I gave. And I think the reason is that when I talk about consent, I don't talk about it just purely from this like negative, like don't rape and don't get arrested idea, nor boundaries. I talk about it as, in order to have great sex where everyone involved is enjoying it, everyone needs to be enthusiastically present. And so how do we make sure that everyone is having the best time that they can be having? And that in of itself will avoid issues around fear or around like prison,
yeah,
which is actually quite rare in our judicial system. But the idea of criminalized behavior will be unlikely if you're concentrating on making sure that everyone is having a good time.
Right. And those, I can see how desire is important to that, and then boundaries, because you can't really relax and enjoy if you're feeling guarded or something might be done that you don't want or something like that. Okay. So that makes sense, right? This is all in the service of people having as much fun as possible.
Correct. And no trauma avoiding the trauma as much as possible.
Right, right. And so why, I mean, it seems so silly, but why is communication so important? Do people really need to use words with this, or is body, sounds and movement enough? Like what's the value in actually using words here?
So one of the activities actually that I have in my book is called An Intro Guide to a Sex Positive You, is having people reflect on what does it look like when they're communicating. And so whether it's sex or not sex, if you want something to happen, what is your form of communication? Like, I'm a big smiler. So if I look really happy, it's probably a good sign, or neutral because I'm a happy person. But for example, I tap out. If something hurts, I tap someone. If I don't like something, I tap someone. And that's a reaction that I have that is very natural for me. And so I tell people, hey, if you feel a double tap, that's me telling you to stop. And so I don't need to say stop. I just double tap. And so I don't think that all communication, most communication isn't verbal, and I don't think it has to be for sex and consent and boundary making. But I do think that we need to know how we naturally communicate so we can tell that to the people in our lives, whether it's sex or non-sex, so that they're aware and responsive to those things, and that we know how to read theirs.
Yeah, and it wouldn't work to just double tap somebody and think they're supposed to know what that means if you have not yet told them that, hey, this is what this means, right? Like that clarity has just got to be so important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize how unclear their messages are.
Yeah. I mean, I know that comes up in therapy all the time. People think they're being really clear, or that the person is getting it or whatever, and they're not.
Why didn't they understand me?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that person's fault, right? They're not picking up on cues. There's plenty of cues that are in fact quite obvious, but it is better to just let folks know what your cues are so that there's no guesswork.
Yeah. So how do you, let's see, what do you say about people that maybe have struggled to communicate around sex? I mean, because I certainly have couples in my practice that can talk about all kinds of things, but talking about sex is like a different animal. For, for a lot of people, they just have never been comfortable talking about it. How can people embrace communication around these things, or be willing to step into that arena if it makes them anxious?
I mean, I think first is I would ask them what it is that does make them anxious. So is it because sex is taboo? Is it because they have shame around their own pleasure? Is it because they think they're supposed to be mind reading their partner, and if they have communication, there's something wrong with their sexual relationship? And so I think the answers to those questions will determine what might be the correct solution or like way to move forward. But let's say it's insecurity. The thing that I always tell folks is you can make your communication sexy. And so if you are having sex, right, whatever sex looks like for you, that you can say, oh my God, it would feel so amazing if you did blank. Right? And that's instructional. You can say it in whatever form feels good for you, but it lets the person know what you want clearly without feeling like you're chastising them, right? You're not like, oh, stop doing that thing. You're saying, oh, it would feel so good if you did this. Or maybe they're doing something that feels really good and you tell them that feels amazing. Please keep going. Don't stop, right? And so it's a communication that is validating of your partner and gets you clearly what you're seeking. Whereas if you have shame around your pleasure, that's something you're going to need to work on also on your own. Mm-hmm. And so where did that come from? Was it a religious background? Was it a parental background? Was it that you got caught masturbating and you were told like, people don't do that, or girls don't do that? Or if you have a vulva and you're a man, but like at the time they said girls don't do that.
Right.
Right. And so thinking about who and why those came up, because they're not natural. We're not, as babies, we're not afraid of our own bodies.
Right.
And then trying to find a path towards undoing that shame.
Yeah. Are there any myths around this, around sexual communication? Like one of the things I talk about is, because again, I hear this sometimes, is my partner should know what I want, magically, or they should just be, if they're so attuned, they would just know, as if they could read my mind or something. So that strikes me as a myth, right? That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think always of this scene from Atonement where she's in this green, and it's a depressing as hell movie, but
I haven't seen it.
So depressing. I left that. Oh, anyway, but she's in a green dress, smushed against the wall. I don't remember if they end up like, either of them end up orgasming, but there's just like, it's very common in heterosexual scenes where someone gets slammed against a wall, and then all of a sudden there's penetration with a penis and orgasm ensues. You're like, boom.
Yeah.
So like one thing is that is how sex works, and that's not how sex works. I recently sent in a comment around foreplay. To me, foreplay is the things that happen before the touch, that everything that involves the touch of genitalia is in fact sex. But anyway, that is something that you would need to enjoy sex if it is penetrative, but not the other pieces, or that sex can include just penetration and not the rest. And that is often not true, particularly for folks with vulvas, but also for folks like with two penises, right? Oral sex is a very common practice. And so penetration, I think, is just generally oversold.
Yeah.
And insofar as that myth, though, around like knowing what your partner wants, we're taught that love is able to read minds, that love is instant connection, that it is hot and it is passionate. And love can definitely be all those things, but there's no reason not to give feedback and to improve the things that we want to improve, and not just assume that like if I keep quiet, things will evolve beautifully. And when in fact it might actually go the opposite way because you're not having those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly talk to people about being responsible for their own pleasure and enlisting the partner, right? And their partner's job is to be a willing participant within their boundaries, but we need to give the gift of this communication to each other. Like I have to let you know how to be most pleasing to me, right? You're not supposed to just figure that out or try everything you can think of until you hit the right thing or something,
And so I actually wrote about this recently too, that arousal time, how much time it takes you to get aroused. And so like, I know that for me, it could be 1 second and it can be 25 minutes. And so the thing that I've learned is that I should be aroused before anything else happens, because otherwise sex just isn't as good. And so being able to tell my partner, yeah, I'm ready and good to go, versus, you know what, I need more time. Let's do blank. And for a lot of people that feels uncomfortable because it feels like you've failed, like your body's failed or your partner's failing, and none of those feel good.
Right. So does this play into any myths around even just sexual chemistry? Like I'm thinking, people might think, oh, if I'm with the right person, they would know, or they would just instantly be, my perfect lover, or or even we're supposed to have whatever chemistry is,
Yeah, I think that there are definitely people who have experience. I think often it's more confidence and like willingness to try things and being open. And so I know that I think that it varies. There are folks who are going to fit together, like in dance. I'm a dancer, that you're like, wow, this communication is incredible. We just knew what this meant. We just knew how to spread. But then you might have someone else that is a complete challenge, that you have to try again, and you figure out how to communicate that verbal-less language. And it's a beautiful production in the end, but it took more work.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean that we didn't have chemistry. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't dance. It just means that practice makes perfect.
Yeah. But I can imagine, when you have those experiences where you get this just like totally flow dance partner, and it seems magical. Well, yeah, it feels great. Right. And it's so wonderful to not work. And it can certainly set you up to think that's how it should be. I guess even if you've never had that, you might have that in your mind. Like that's how sex is supposed to unfold. That's what we're supposed to have, as opposed to, no, it's okay to put into work and communication and figure this thing out. Right.
And then on the flip side, there should be a level of arousal there and interest, right? There should be some sexual interest. If you're never experiencing sexual interest, it might be that you're with the wrong people. It might be that you're asexual.
Right.
And either of those is fine, but I know that for some folks, they'll just think that they are asexual. There are plenty of real asexual people, but they'll think they're asexual or demisexual, and then they realize that they are in fact attracted to a different gender than they're dating. And once they're with the gender that is the person that they would be attracted to, their sexuality blossoms.
Yeah.
And so also being in tune with yourself, like, is this something that is happening consistently? Is this something that is happening with this person in particular? Because it can be a sign, but it doesn't have to be. If you're still able to get turned on with one another, then it's probably just a matter of learning each other versus compatibility.
Right. Hey everybody, it's Jessa, and we're just taking a little break in the show so I can share something exciting with you. At least I think it's exciting. I wrote a book called Sex Without Stress, and I had turned it into an online course. And now I've reformatted it so that you can sign up at any time. It's more like an a la carte thing. For less than $100, you and your partner can work through this entire process, guided through webinars and assignments and conversations to have and real-world exercises to use to take the stress out of your sex life. So if you're in a good relationship but sex is the issue, this could be a perfect fit. And then separate from that, you can opt into my membership group, month at a time, or you can sign up for a whole year. That's where you'll get the personal support while you're working through the process. So it comes with Q&A sessions, bonus content, some guest presenters, and a private support community like a forum. So that's priced separately so you can just participate in that when it's useful to you. Anyway, if you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com. And now back to the show. So what about the boundary part of this? You know, communicating boundaries, is that something that should also be in the moment? I mean, I guess it needs to be in the moment if something's happening, but it also seems to me you might want conversations outside of the bedroom about what some of those are.
Yeah, I think in particular, if you're someone who has experienced sexual violence or sexual trauma, it's important to know your triggers, and triggers can change. So it's not that I'm saying that you're responsible for knowing your triggers so much as if you are aware of them, that sharing that with a partner before you have sex is super helpful, because something may seem innocuous. It might not seem scary or surprising to someone, but for someone else who's experienced something negative, it could be terrible. I, for example, which has nothing to actually do with trauma, I don't like my neck being touched. Or maybe it's arguable whether or not it's due to trauma.
I was going to say, yeah.
I had someone attempt to suck my blood because they thought they were a vampire when I was 12. And so maybe that is related. But anyway, I don't like people touching my neck. And I once burst out in tears because someone did. And so now it's a warning. That's a boundary. Don't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
And that is helpful. I also think it's helpful to communicate other things that you might know. So if you are someone who may freeze in the moment or have a flashback, letting your partner know, if you feel safe enough to do so, hey, if this happens, these are my needs. This is how you can help me come back to safety and come back to a space that feels good. But insofar as normal ones, I think it's always nice to say, like, here are some things that I really enjoy. Let's try that if it's a new partner. And here are some things that I might be willing to try out. And here are some things I really don't want you to do and would make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, there can certainly be some hard no's, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what does it look like? I mean, maybe this seems like a silly question, but what does it look like to have those respected? Like what should someone maybe expect from their partner if they're going to share some boundaries and speak up about triggers, or this is just off my list? What are the kinds of things we deserve to hear from a partner? Versus things that might be a little bit of a red flag, or like, wait, this isn't respectful.
I'm so glad you asked that. So a good sign in my mind is someone who accepts it and does not put blame on you for that knowledge. I think it is common, particularly if you don't end up telling a partner about a trauma and you get triggered, some people become very defensive and they will start angrily yelling at you and like blaming you for the situation in which you are experiencing some sort of upset. And that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign if someone is blaming you because you are upset. A good partner will patiently wait and say, this person's crying. I didn't expect it. I don't know why. Or this person's shivering, or this person's screaming, whatever it is that you do. I don't know why. I don't understand. I will wait until they can tell me. Right? And I will listen and I will see. And in the end, if it's something, maybe it wasn't trauma and you're just like mean, and they have an opportunity to respond to your meanness. But if it was trauma, then you were able to handle it in a supportive way.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that most folks are not actually very good at responding. And so it doesn't necessarily mean you have to throw that person out, but you do need to explain to them that the way that they handled it wasn't okay. And if they continue to handle it that way, then this might not be the right person for you.
Yeah. So what do you think goes in? I mean, I can think of a couple things, but what do you think makes most people not handle hearing boundaries very well? Like what are the factors that go into people not being so graceful around that?
Some of them are like, if you are used to doing something that has quote unquote worked with other partners. You're like, oh, everyone loves when I do my blank move. And then this person's like, actually, I don't want you to do anything of that sort. That makes me uncomfortable. I think that there's a level of insecurity and doubt. And I know people's bodies better than you know your own kind of scenario going there. And yeah, and I think that for others, like, it's a challenge. Like, I will teach you how to like it.
Yeah, that just came up recently in a session with a couple. Yeah, I know you better than you know you. Let me show you. Yeah.
And it's not to say like tastes can change and there may be shifts, but those shifts are more likely to occur in a safe and supportive environment than they are to occur by force.
Right.
And even if they end up liking the thing, they might not want to do it again with you because you didn't respect their boundaries. Yeah. And so they might find someone else to do the thing that you taught them that they liked.
Yeah. Yeah. I can also imagine, though, that there's some people who don't handle this well necessarily because this is like one of their favorite things. And it's, it's potentially a loss that they don't get to do something they really have enjoyed. And so that might be hard.
I've heard that along oral sex, those who enjoy giving it and with those who don't enjoy receiving.
Yeah.
And so I can totally understand how that would be difficult. And this is not a solution for everyone, but we put a lot of emphasis in the society around monogamy and the idea that monogamous relationships are the best relationships, when I don't personally think that's true. I think that there's lots of room for other forms of relationships. And in the case that you have something that you really enjoy that is an integral part of your sex life, and one of your partners can't give it to you, having a conversation around seeking those things and those needs, whether they're sexual or non-sexual, outside of that relationship, ethically and consensually, for me is a solution. It won't work for everyone.
Right.
Ethical non-monogamy is not for everyone.
Right. I've done lots of episodes on that
conversation.
Yeah, it is one solution when there's sort of an erotic mismatch, but again, not for everybody. The other thing I think maybe happens for people if they're struggling to hear boundary is I think they feel like they're being identified with some past abuser. Right? Like I think that's part of where the defensiveness comes in. It's like, wait, I'm not this person that hurt you, or they get afraid, afraid that they're being seen that way, or maybe did they act out of bounds some way that they didn't intend? And, I think there's a lot of sensitivity in people to not feel
like a rapist.
Yeah. They don't want to feel that way. And all of a sudden the partner's reacting as if some big, or maybe a violation even has happened and that's not what they meant or didn't know. And, I think that's really loaded on both sides.
Yeah, that is something I also talk about in the book, actually. And the fact that sometimes people will let their partners do things to them that are uncomfortable or feel unsafe because you don't want your partner to feel like a violator. And so I think that's another opportunity for communication, right? Like I have been that person. I have not wanted to make my partner feel like they were violating me while I was feeling violated.
Right. Well, you're sort of letting them do this thing. Yeah. And then both people can feel so bad after that. Yeah.
And so the thing that makes the most sense is to pause, right? To say, and it takes a lot of strength. I know it does, but to pause and say, wait, stop. I need a break. Right. And then you can decide whether or not to unpause. But that break moment gives you the opportunity to talk about the thing that is happening in your head. And to be clear, this is not because you are a bad person. It's not because I think you want to harm me, but something in my head is flashing back and I need to regroup.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm constantly telling couples how important no is. Like you can't really say yes if you can't say no. And your partner, only by knowing that you'll take care of yourself, are they really free to ask for things, because they know you'll say no if you need to. You're not going to get into a situation where you're just sort of going along with something you don't want to be doing.
A lot of pleasantries on both sides can end up in unfortunate scenarios.
Yeah. So what does somebody do? So let's say they're pretty good about communicating what they want, what their desires are in the moment and in general, and they've had some conversations about boundaries and things like that. What do they do if someone is not respecting those boundaries? Or I thought I told them not to do this thing, but now it's happening. Like what?
My immediate reaction is you bounce.
Yeah.
That is a walk away scenario. It is, I think that's often not a conversation that we're having when we have a conversation around boundary making. It's like, learn what your boundaries are and state them, but that only goes so far. And when someone is clearly not willing to respect those boundaries, and it's an opportunity to decide, does this person have value in my life? Do they remain in my life? Am I keeping them for reasons that aren't good? Because it is a very big red flag when someone does not respect your clear, hard boundaries.
Yeah. And I would say the same, and we sort of touched on this before, but if somebody's going to blame you for them, if somebody's going to be coercive or constantly pushing or shaming you about it, or just somehow gaslighting you even, all major red flags.
Yes. And I think that there's so much blame put on folks whose boundaries are broken, but we don't teach people how to walk away. We barely teach people how to make boundaries at all.
Right.
And when we do, that tends to be the end point of that conversation. Healthy relationships, I think, are now starting to be discussed more, but not so widely and everywhere. And so that idea of being able to recognize non-physical unhealthy practice.
Yeah. Anything I've forgotten to ask you, or something else you want to? Have we touched on everything here?
I think that also what does boundaries mean is not just the physical. It's not just where can you touch me, when can you touch me, but it's around your time. It's around your space. There's so much that we can choose to set boundaries on. It can be around your emotional labor. And so if you have someone who always calls you, or that you always call to complain, perhaps thinking about how much emotional labor that person or you are giving each other, and whether or not you want to set like let's have a 15-minute venting session, and we go, and then we stop and we do something else, that our days are not caught up in this.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's sort of making me think of a bunch of, right, how much negativity around work, or how many times do I expect you to text me or not, or how quick you can expect me to text you back if you leave me a message, or boundaries around, are you allowed to look at each other's phones or pick them up, or,
Can you send nudes? And if so, what time of the day? Like those kinds of things where folks are with other people and don't necessarily want body parts popping up on their phone at inopportune times.
Right. Yeah, and then if we're talking about, consensual non-monogamy, of course, there's boundaries, all kinds of boundaries and agreements people might make around that. So, Cool. So where can people learn a little bit more about you, get in touch if they want to?
I think probably the best place to look is sexpositiveyou.com is where I have a lot of my different information, the book, the courses I'll be teaching, and what have you. And then if you're on Instagram or other social media, I am Yael the Sex Geek on Insta, Facebook, and Twitter.
I'll put those links all in the show notes too, so people can follow you and get in touch.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again for taking the time to talk to me.
I enjoyed this. Thank you, Jess.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.